Up next, let's check in on the latest activities when it comes to the corn and soybean markets. Joining the show this week is Luke Beckman from Central Valley Ag. Luke, thank you very much for joining us. We sure appreciate it.
Great to be back, Bryce.
Well, as we jump in here on the corn market, seems like since about December, we've been playing a game of limbo in the futures market, seeing how low things can go. Why such a bearish sentiment for corn, Luke?
Well, we're in that time of year, Bryce, where there's just not a lot of bullish influence that can impact the market. If you think about it, the U.S. crop size has been determined as of January 12th. And, that leaves us really with production risk in South America. And for the most part, things have been looking pretty good there, especially when you consider where we were a year ago with the tough crop that we had in Argentina specifically. So you're just in that time of year where we're kind of in between crops, in between the South American crop, in between the U.S. crop. And it's not a strong period seasonally in most years as we look back, through history. So not a lot here. I don't want to get super concerned for that reason. Our seasonal strength should be in front of us, but kind of a grind here as we make some new lows in March corn this week.
You bring up South America weather. There's always a lot of information coming out there, sometimes conflicting information. So I'll just ask you, over the past couple of weeks, what's the most important information that our Nebraska audience should be aware of, specifically on the corn front?
Well, I think you need to look at the big picture with South America. And year over year, there's a big change in what's going on in Argentina. And we typically talk a lot about Brazil when we talk about the South American crops, and rightfully so. But when you look at Argentine production, we've got production up almost 62% year over year in Argentina. And I think that's important because the Argentine crop is going to come to market quicker than the Brazilian one as it relates to corn. Brazil's main corn crop is their second corn crop. They're planting that right now as they harvest soybeans. And that corn's not available to the world market until we get into late U.S. summer. And so right now it's really more about Argentina. And there's going to be some implications as that corn starts to come to the world market. Keep in mind, 62% larger crop year over year. That has a lot to do with us being in an El Nino weather phase compared to La Nina a year ago, which really negatively impacts the Argentine crop. So we've got more Argentine corn that's going to hit the world market starting in April. And that's going to have some impacts on U.S. export inspections going forward. And for our Nebraska producers and really producers in the Western Corn Belt, a lot of your export program for your northern bushels, your North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota grain moving off the West Coast is going to find some competition here in another 60 days. And so that could have some basis implications for the Western Corn Belt as those Dakota bushels really look to find a different home if we don't have a robust export program going off the West Coast. Combine that with a lot of on-farm grain. We look back at the December stocks report, 60% plus of the corn that was on commercial storage and in on-farm space, that total pool, 62% of that was on farm. And so that's the highest number we've seen since 2011, which means the U.S. farmer is holding a larger share of this year's corn crop, and a lot of that's unpriced. And so if you combine an export program that wants to slow down as we get into the spring, and you combine that with a lot of unpriced grain, there's a lot of grain that's going to have to find a home even if we do find rallies. And so just from a cash market standpoint, if you don't have a robust export program pulling grain away, basis will tend to soften, especially if we find price rallies and producers want to be sellers.
Of course, on the corn front, Luke, appreciate your thoughts there. How's the story differ when it comes to soybeans? I suppose we start in South America to begin the conversation.
Yeah, South America is Argentina, Brazil. You're looking at those two with the bean crop. We'll have a WASDE report out tomorrow as of when we're recording this, and that'll update us on the size of those crops, at least what the USDA is thinking. Brazil probably moving a little bit lower in terms of their estimates. But again, the story is Argentina. That crop is double what it was last year. They had a terrible soybean crop a year ago. They're back. They're looking to have a record bean crop this year. And combined with Brazil, Uruguay, Paraguay, total South American production looks to be a record this year. And so a little bit of a similar story in the beans. When you look at the domestic carryout in the United States, you would think that beans should be supported. But on the global front, again, we have adequate supplies of soybeans. And so, again, we're trying to get into that spring seasonal time period for the beans. Really, we need to get a look at U.S. acres, which we'll find with the March Planting Intentions Report. Before we get to that point, we've got the February Outlook Forum, which is the USDA's early assessment of what they think the new crop balance sheets will look like. So the yields that they're going to use on that next week will be the yields they use in their May WASDE report. That's the first report that we see that estimates new crop production. So there are some implications next week as we look at the February outlook for them. And overall, trendline crops with the type of acres we're looking at look to build the U.S. domestic carryouts in 24-25.
Good look ahead to 24-25, expecting some crush facility, at least one of them to be online here in the next year. As we look at the pace of exports for soybeans, how important do you think crush is going to be moving forward for our Nebraska soybean producers, Luke?
It'll be paramount. We're seeing our share of global exports in beans slip a little bit. South America, particularly Brazil, is expanding soybean production area every year at a rate of about 4%. And when you combine that with Chinese soybean imports that have totally plateaued, it's pretty easy to see what's happening with the share of exports that the U.S. has access to. So our share in that business is going down. We really need to soak up, transition some demand from export to crush. So that's coming at a good time and really good for the Nebraska producer as we add a crush plant this fall in 2024 and looking to have another one online in the fall of 2025. So from a basis standpoint, that's going to be positive. What it does to overall flat price is a drop in the bucket compared to the big picture of what happens with the futures price as it relates to beans.
Let's wrap up with your final word. Any thoughts you want to leave us with, or perhaps some recommendations, Luke?
I think as it relates to corn, keep those basis comments in mind. I think if you're sitting on-farm inventory, you need to think about moving some of that before you plant. Keep in mind, it costs 4 cents a bushel a month in interest just to keep that corn on the farm with this interest rate environment. So look to move some grain into these strong basis values while they're around. I think if you want to keep your price open, basis contracts or re-owning that, or even looking at a more limited risk strategy like selling that cash grain and buying call options is not a bad move. So look at that. I would also encourage producers to really look at new crop corn. I think we're getting into an environment where we're going to see carryouts growing. So producers need to be proactive in how they market that crop. They need to be looking at new crop sales in corn.